And the greatest virtue of a high priestess is that she recognizes that youth is necessary to the representative of the goddess, so that she will retire gracefully in favor of a younger woman, should the coven so decide in council. For the true high priestess realizes that gracefully surrendering pride of place is one of the greatest of virtues, and that thereby she will return to that pride of place in another life, with greater power and beauty. What the fuck?
As I do will, so mote it be.
Welcome to Blade and Broom, your favorite witchy aunt's cottage, tea shop, ritual space where we talk about witchcraft and magic, especially traditional folkloric witchcraft, but not just. I'm Lorelei Black, and I am so glad you're here. Thank you for all of the ways that you support the channel, including liking, subscribing, commenting, and also checking out the links down in the description box to today's resources and other projects that I am working on. You are fantastic humans. As I have said before here, for those of you that have been in this space with me before, I am a non-Wiccan traditional witch, a folkloric witch. And I'll go on to note that I understand, based on the comments and the discussions that I have with people who watch the channel, that a lot of folks who watch my videos would also describe themselves as non-Wiccan in some way. Although there's sort of like a Wiccan continuum that we can discuss at another time. But a lot of people here are practicing a version of craft that they would not describe as Wicca, that is not rooted in the Wicca that was presented by Gerald Gardner or by his students, the Sanderses, or by any of the immediate outcroppings of that initial work. All that being said, I think it's really important that as witches, we understand the history and roots of the craft that we're practicing. And for most of the neo-pagan, neo-Wiccan community or neo-witchcraft community, the new, revivalist versions of witchcraft, Gardnerian Wicca provides a bedrock foundation for a lot of the versions of both craft and paganism that have become known and popular since the 1950s. In my own practice, one of the things that I do is to take a hard look at certain tenets of my belief or practice and ask, where did you come from? For instance, a whole lot of what gets considered ethical or unethical within the greater witchcraft community, however one defines oneself, those ethics are often sort of framed by the Ardanes, or the old laws that were included in the Gardnerian Book of Shadows. Now, I am not here to debate the actual oldness of the laws or where or how Gardner got his book. Whether Gerald and Aleister Crowley holed up somewhere on retreat, picking each other's brains about magic and paganism, and each coming out of that time creating their own magical order that filled different needs within the community based on the same source material, or whether Gardner received it directly from the hands of his initiator, Dorothy Clutterbuck. I'm not here to debate that. I don't know. I don't care. Because none of that actually matters for the talk that we're going to have today. What does matter is that by the 1950s, Gardner had his book of shadows, and by the 1960s, it was in some form of distribution. Early on, at the time, it was being hand copied from one initiate to another, as they took their initiations into the New Forest Coven or into other covens that hived off. And it was later printed and shared by folks who felt that that information needed to be more widely available, who believe in sort of a freedom of information getting to the people. That means that for 70 years now, the information in that book, the concepts, the tenets, the rituals, have been a major foundation for witchcraft and how we know and what we think of the craft. Gardnerian craft was really like the first witchcraft that was being written about by practitioners after the witchcraft laws were repealed. And friends, that's just a lot of cultural pull that one text has, most of which that influence is unseen by a lot of people who are contemporarily practicing witchcraft, who are unaware of sort of the roots and foundations of their practice. Because I think really within the movement these days, as new practitioners come in and are seeing things on social media, on Instagram, on Pinterest, Tumblr, TikTok, Twitter, there's not as much talk about where we came from and how we got started and how that then influences what we're doing now. There's just sort of a lot of like resharing, 10 stones for this and blah, blah, blah. So I want to start with the preface that like, I am not here to dig on Gardnerian Wicca or on Wicca in general. That's not what I'm about. While a lot of my viewers are non-Wiccan, I would also say that probably a lot of you are. I've had several really great comments for folks that are practicing more Wiccan lines of witchcraft. What I want to talk about is some of the biases and like old ways of thinking that are embedded in those Ardanes that have influenced our thinking around ethics within witchcraft. Now, if you actually read the Ardanes, and I highly recommend you do, there is a copy available on sacredtexts.com, link down below. Most of the Ardanes are actually about how not to get yourself killed for being a witch, or how not to get other people killed for being a witch. And the short version is, say what you gotta say to officials so that you don't get ripped out of your life and home, but don't out other witches, like real other witches. Don't throw them under the bus. So in that sense, the Ardanes are really about not getting yourself and your coven mates killed during religiously and politically conservative times, which is just fine. It's cool. I'm down with it. However, there are these other little like nuggets that are thrown in there almost as like sidebars to the big conversation that I think we need to talk about. They've been preserved in the culture of witchcraft, and I don't know if they deserve to be preserved. I present this to you as an opportunity to talk about how any of us may be operating under an outdated paradigm or mindset that we may be just taking for granted and not even looking at, and that it's a wise thing to do if we are indeed the craft of the wise, to look at our work under a microscope, to look at our beliefs and our practices, and to ask why they are what they are, and if there is a better way. Yeah, okay, so let's go back up to the top of the show. Youth is necessary to the representative of the goddess. Yeesh. I'm really hoping that nobody needs me to like point out what's wrong with that. The whole section talks about youth and beauty as both markers of and qualifications for the favor of the divine. And it just, ugh. But this section is actually a really great opportunity for us to poke at that place in ourselves, that little monster in our head that says, you're not young enough, you're not pretty enough to be worthy, not just of the divine, but of whatever, of the promotion, of friendship, of love from your family, of, having a healthy relationship. That place that says you're not good enough because you're not young and you're not beautiful or handsome. Because frankly, that monster gets fed entirely too often, and we need to recognize the trash ass lie that it is. Number 2, never accept money for the art. This is one that just so many people within witchcraft accept at face value as just being a good and valid statement and way of believing. It's presented within the Ardanes as the opposite. Like, not taking money for spiritual acts would be the opposite of what Christian priests do, and that it's therefore being, put forward as this ideal. So what's actually happening here is a rather puritanical reaction to the perceived excesses of the Catholic Church, and results in like a general shunning of money and not wanting to associate money with spiritual practice at all. Seeing money as something that's inherently bad and dirty. But here's my argument. There are a host of pre-Christian examples in myth and folklore and history of the exchange of goods and services for the assistance, the spiritual, magical assistance of a wise one. And that those goods and services or currency are the energetic payment for the energetic work that the wise one or the witch is doing on behalf of the client, who needs to give up something in order to accomplish the magic, and helps to fund and feed the person who's doing the actual work. We don't work on a barter economy all that much anymore. It is just not how our society works. We use what a colleague of mine calls survival tickets, which we then use to purchase the goods and services that we need to fund our survival. But it's all an energy exchange. And furthermore, adhering to this idea that selling our goods and services is somehow unethical is actually a direct assault on Latino and African diasporic religions and practices that have that as like a fundamental basis, because the energy exchange is so understood and like rooted into the culture. And please don't at me. I am actually assuming best intent on the part of Gerald. And not thinking that he was denigrating the practices of other cultures. I'm assuming that he may not have been that aware of how it worked within those paradigms. He was an anthropologist, and he was pretty informed about some other cultures' work, but I don't know that he was actually all that informed about the practices of magical practitioners in Latin America or in African diasporic religions. I think he just hadn't looked at them, which is, again, a whole other subreddit. So I'm not saying that he was intentionally poking them in the eye. I'm just saying that it was a poke, and that we need to be aware of it so that we don't perpetuate the poke. This idea of exchanging money for magic is a topic that I'm actually planning on tackling in a whole other video soon-ish. So if you're interested in hearing more about that or being part of that conversation, please make sure that you have subscribed and are getting notifications. Number 3, never bargain or cheapen anything that you buy with the art. More money and magic rules. The idea here is that you shouldn't haggle or bargain for things that you've used magic or spell work in order to obtain. So like, for instance, if you have done a magical working to find the right home for you and your family to live in, when that home pops up on the real estate market, You're supposed to offer the asking price as it is and not negotiate about any of the details. You just take it as it is, and give them the money that they're asking for. And that's actually the example that is used in the Ardanes, is this idea of buying a home. But I have seen in practice more that this sort of gets talked about in regard to the tools that we purchase for the craft. That if you're buying an athame from a blacksmith, a knife maker, that you shouldn't haggle or bargain for that price. You just give them what they ask for it. But speaking as somebody whose family has often like tap danced on the poverty line, this is another one that has some implicit bias against working class people who don't necessarily have the means to purchase without negotiating a price. I feel like this is a law that could really have only been written by somebody who had the privilege of financial security and probably even actual abundance. Number 4, you may use the art for your own advantage or for the advantage of the craft, only if you be sure you harm none. There's a couple of things to unpack here. One is that the whole harm none business may have gotten added to the Ardanes, to the Wiccan Rede, to like the literature in general during the Wiccan revival of the mid-20th century, just to make Wicca as a religion and as a practice more palatable to the Christian folks who dominated the political, legal, cultural sphere, and still do. Certainly we can say, because we can see from various records and folkloric writings, that the pre-modern European witchcraft experience did not really bother itself about harming none. It didn't really address the issue of harm at all in terms of what a practitioner should or shouldn't do. Another thing to unpack is that nearly all of the practices that get viewed under the lens of witchcraft, they might not call themselves witchcraft, but from our perspective, we look at them and go, oh yeah, I recognize that, that's witchcraft. Almost all of those kinds of practices have baneful work as, again, like half of what is possible to be done, and that it's not considered a wrong thing within the magical community to do. Now, the average person who's getting the bad thing done to them is going to feel, done wrong. But in general, baneful witchcraft is considered part and parcel of the witchcraft gig. You do blessings, you do blastings, you do balancings. It's witchcraft. All that being said, I think it's perfectly acceptable for a person to say, I don't personally do baneful working because I don't want to deal with the potential consequences of that. It's just not cool to say real witches, TM, don't do blasting magic. There's a lot of apologetics on the harm none concept as well, and I recommend that if you have adopted this as a credo for yourself at all, that you look into those. Certainly most folks that are like deeply practicing Wicca do spend some time looking at it. I had one person comment on a video that the Wiccan Rede, which says, and it harm none, do as you will, says, if there's no harm, you can do what you will. And it doesn't say anything. It does not speak. It is silent on the topic of if it's causing harm. So the idea there would be, if it's causing harm, you're just going to have to give it some more thought. You can't just do as you will. You can still do it. You just are going to have to think around it a little more. So there's that nugget to consider as well. Also, it looks like the Charm Sisters had it wrong. Personal gain was never a taboo, not even within Wicca, right? And definitely not within modern witchcraft or folkloric witchcraft. Like personal gain was why you do witchcraft for a lot of it. And I say, please do use every tool at your disposal to create the best life you can. Ultimately, I just think that the Ardanes are due for some rethinking. We are not fresh out of the broom closet anymore. We're not fresh out of the shadows as a religion or a practice or both, however you're handling that. We're not fearful that the laws of the land are going to seize, torture, and murder us for being who and what we are. And we have more dialogue and interaction with, around, between practitioners of different cultural practices and paradigms. We need to think for ourselves what our Ardanes are, what is ordained to be done within our own magical practices. So what have we ordained as the laws that govern our right action as witches? And that's all I have to say about that for today, friends. Tell me down in the comments what you consider magical laws for correct or best practice to be. I hope you found today's chat useful, informative, encouraging, thought-provoking. If so, please bless me with the magic of the like button and tell your witchy friends that good stuff's happening over here at Blade and Broom. And also, if you'd like to learn more about the traditional witchcraft that I practice, or just keep up with my witchy shenanigans, go over to the Thread app and get yourself a free account to keep up with me in the news and notes, or go to the Etsy shop and check out the Red Thread Academy courses. I will see you back here again next week for more witchy goodness. Bye, friends.
Here come I to call you.